Hello and welcome to a new episode of Seeking Answers, and I am on my way to the very location of almost one of the most dastardly unsolved mysteries of all time.
Alfred Rouse was born in London on April the 6th, 1894, but sadly, when he was just 6 years old, his mother, whose identity remains unknown but was supposedly an actress, completely abandoned him and their entire family. Without a mum, Alfred's father Walter had no time for his children either, leaving him and his two siblings to mostly be raised by their aunt instead. At school he was well behaved and often described as being bright and quite athletic. He grew up as a member of the church and even became a sacristan, taking care of the sacristy, the church itself, and the contents of their worship. Alfred left school at just 14 years old, before getting a job as an office boy for an estate agent. Not long after, he managed to secure employment at a textile manufacturing firm. He also attended several evening classes, all at the same time, to try to further progress his education. To add to his ever-growing list of talents, Alfred was a decent singer and skilled at playing the piano, violin and mandolin. By 1909, he got a job at a West End furniture manufacturer, which is when he met a young clerk named Lily May Watkins at a local dance, and the two formed a relationship. On July the 28th, 1914, World War I was declared, and just 4 days afterwards, Alfred Rouse enlisted in the British Army, even being assigned to the Queen's Regiment as a private. He did his training in England, and before he was sent overseas to fight for his country, he managed to marry Lily on November the 29th, 1914. He arrived in France on March the 15th, where he stayed in Paris for a few weeks before finally being sent into battle. During this time, he allegedly cheated on his wife and conceived an illegitimate child. During battle, Alfred Rouse came face to face with a German soldier. He went to attack him, but lunged forward prematurely, missing him, and the soldier managed to get away. This incident haunted Alfred for years, causing him nightmares, as he felt like a failure who was unable to help his country. On the final day of the Battle of Festubert, a bomb exploded incredibly close to Alfred Rouse. Numerous fragments of shrapnel hit his leg and head, knocking him unconscious. He was actually hospitalized for almost an entire year and required several operations on his temporal region and leg. As a result, he was unable to bend his knee completely and had developed edema, causing a constant difficulty to walk. He was passed around to several different hospitals before finally being discharged on February the 11th, 1916. He moved back in with his wife in Stoke Newington, but was now severely disabled. By July, his memory was becoming more and more defective. He wasn't even able to wear hats as it irritated his injuries. It wasn't until January of 1917, a year and a half since the bomb incident, when he started to make a lot of progress in his recovery. A year went by before Alfred informed his doctor that he was starting to suffer from severe dizziness, but the doctor did admit that Alfred was very talkative and would laugh at random times during their conversation. He seemed to be recovering well. By September 1918, Alfred continued to complain about his memory becoming defective, as well as struggling with insomnia. By July the 30th the following year, he still wasn't able to bend his knee, but it seemed his head was nearly completely healed. The bizarre thing is that the doctor was unable to find any physical reason why his knee just wasn't bending correctly. By August 1920, his head had made a complete recovery, 5 years after it was injured, and his knee movement issues had also decreased dramatically. In an attempt to get exercise without physically overexerting himself, he joined a local tennis club, whilst taking on jobs with limited physicality, most of which involved cars, leading to him also becoming a skilled mechanic. It was during this time when Alfred began enticing women, pretending to be single to have more affairs. He did this with a 14-year-old girl from Edinburgh, who he even made pregnant when she turned 15. At this point, he completely abandoned her to give birth in a home for single mothers. By 1925, Alfred Rouse met a servant named Nellie Tucker, whom he also began having an affair with. 3 years later, she gave birth to their child. Alfred also didn't want to take care of their baby, but Nellie became the first of many to file a child support order against him. In June of 1929, Alfred got a job as a commercial traveller around the south coast and the Midlands, which is when he had saved enough money to buy himself and his wife a house, as well as a 1928 Morris Minor. Between 1929 and 1930, he cheated on his wife with several women, some of which were married, some single, but most were poor, being manipulated by Alfred and his charm, promising them marriage and wealth. It's also believed that he illegally married at least 3 of these women, as well as had countless other illegitimate children. By the summer of 1930, Nellie Tucker was pregnant yet again, which is when she wanted Alfred to marry her. Another woman named Phyllis Jenkins was also carrying his child. At this point, many women across England, and one in France, had come forward to file child support order cases against him. This now put Alfred Rouse in a huge financial strain, but nobody could predict what would happen next. On November the 5th, 1930, at 8:30 p.m, Alfred informed his wife that he was heading to Leicester for a business meeting. The next morning, at around 1:50, 2 guys had been to a Fawkes Night dance in Northampton and now returned to their homes in Hardingstone when they saw a fire in the distance. Considering this was the early hours after bonfire night, they assumed it was just that. Walking down the road towards them was a neatly dressed man carrying an attaché case. They actually spoke to him and pointed out the fire, to which the man replied, "It looks like somebody's having a bonfire up there." The man proceeded to walk past them and disappeared into the night.
Okay, so we're actually here in Hardingstone, and this would have been around the area in which the 2 individuals did have their encounter with Alfred Rouse. We would have come down this path, walked straight past where the camera is, veering round to the left towards Northampton town. This area up here, this country lane, is around the area where the car was actually found to be completely engulfed in flames.
As the 2 men approached the fire, they soon realised it was actually a Morris Minor, completely ablaze at the side of the country lane, the flames reaching as high as 12 feet. The police were quickly alerted and they managed to extinguish the fire, which is when they discovered inside a charred corpse in the front seat, with the head on the driver's seat and the right arm was burned off at the elbow. It was so badly burned and disintegrated that the police initially believed the head was actually a scorched rugby ball. The 2 witnesses described the man they encountered, causing the police to file an appeal for this individual to be located and questioned. Nearby, a wooden mallet was found with 3 human hairs attached to it. Despite the flames, the license plate of the vehicle was actually undamaged, and it was revealed that this car belonged to Alfred Rouse. At around 2 a.m, just 10 minutes after the witnesses found the burning car, Alfred's wife believed she heard him return home. But once the sun rose, she realised that this wasn't the case and he was nowhere to be seen. She was taken in to try to identify the victim, but due to the condition of his corpse, she wasn't allowed to actually see the body. Instead, she was shown remains of the burned clothes and a charred wallet, both of which she believed belonged to her husband, though she wasn't 100% sure. The body belonged to a man between the age of 33 and 37, and based on the condition of his lungs, he had likely worked in an incredibly dusty atmosphere. It was confirmed that the victim had been alive, but unconscious when the fire started, and he died within just 30 seconds of it igniting. But in actuality, on November the 6th, just hours after the fire was discovered, Alfred Rouse arrived in London. He stayed there for around half an hour before getting on a train to Glamorganshire to meet up with his mistress Phyllis Jenkins. He informed her that his car had been stolen in Northampton, which is why it took him so long to reach her, but he assured her that he had reported the incident to the police and the insurance company. The next day, news of the fire had broke, and Phyllis showed Alfred a photo of his burned car, but he denied that it was his. At 10 AM, he boarded a coach at Cardiff, heading towards Hammersmith Broadway, but as soon as he left, Phyllis informed the police of their encounter and exactly where he was heading. They were waiting there at the other bus terminal for his arrival, before making the arrest. Instantly, Alfred admitted that it was his car, but initially claimed that the person inside was a hitchhiker who he met near St Albans. They then parked up so Alfred could urinate when the man accidentally set the car on fire. He claimed he was on his way to Scotland Yard to confess when he was arrested, as he hadn't been able to sleep due to the guilt. Regardless of his story, he was escorted back to Northampton to stand trial. However, once interrogated, Alfred completely changed his claim. He now said that he met the man hitchhiking along the Great North Road and picked him up. He stopped to urinate and asked the passenger to fill the petrol tank. However, the man was smoking at the time and accidentally set himself ablaze. He claimed he attempted to open the door to help, but was beaten back by the flames. He then panicked and fled the scene. However, this entire story was called into question. Upon forensic examination, it was revealed that the feeding pipe between the petrol tank and the carburetor had actually been loosened, which would allow the petrol to stream into and underneath the car, suggesting it was completely intentional. Though an engineer did testify that the heat inside a burning car would have actually been enough to loosen the joint on the feeding pipe itself. The fire genuinely could have been an accident, which would have then loosened it and spread the fire further. Alfred Rouse could have been speaking the truth, though a vehicular expert claimed that the feeding pipe had clearly been forcibly loosened, and this wasn't the act of the fire. Rouse maintained that it was an accident, claiming the victim spilled petrol on himself, which caused the huge burst of flames. However, this doesn't explain how the man was unconscious at the time the fire started, or the mallet that was found nearby. He was also questioned as to why, if he was fleeing in such a panic, he still managed to get his case with him. Alfred claimed that the man rested his hand on it earlier in the evening, so he became paranoid that he would steal it and ensured to keep it with himself at all times. But this also doesn't explain why he told Phyllis that he had reported the car as stolen when this wasn't the case at all. The victim's trousers were completely doused in petrol, though it is possible this could have happened by a drunk man trying to fill the tank. However, Phyllis did testify that when he arrived the next morning, Alfred smelled of petrol and his eyebrows were somewhat burned. 3 of his mistresses were called in to testify, who confirmed his huge financial issues. Alfred came across as confident in court when retelling his story, though he would stammer and seem nervous when questioned about the condition of the car and the feeding pipe. He would also openly admit to contradicting himself with his claims. However, during the entire investigation, Alfred refused to help the police actually identify the victim, claiming that he won't help them as they've not helped him. He stated he never asked for the guy's identity because he never needed to, though he did admit the man was around 40 years old, between 5'6" and 5'8", dressed in a light coloured overcoat and had the general appearance of a clerk with a slight Irish accent. He also had a boxing or a sporting tattoo on his right forearm and was wearing police boots, which he claimed to have been given by Northampton police, and he carried a sports diary. On January the 26th, 1931, Alfred Rouse pleaded not guilty of murder. The trial lasted just 6 days, and the jury only deliberated for 25 minutes before finding him guilty, and he was sentenced to death. Alfred tried to appeal the decision, but this was denied. He continued to maintain his innocence until he was days away from death, when he finally wrote a letter to confess his guilt. A man spoke to me near the Swan and Pyramid public house. He was a down and out and he told the usual hard luck story. I took him into the public house and he had some beer. I had lemonade. Of course I paid for the drinks. He told me he usually hung about there. He did not tell me his name, but he did say that he had no relations and was looking for work and that he was in the habit of getting lifts on lorries. He was the sort of man nobody would miss, and I thought he would suit the plan I had in mind. I suddenly realised I should do it on November the 5th, when a fire would not be noticed so much. I think it was November 2nd or 3rd when I searched out the man. He was having a drink of beer and we talked. When I said that I intended to go to Leicester on the Wednesday, he said he would be glad of a lift up there. I made an appointment with him for the Wednesday night for 8 o'clock. I met him outside the Swan and Pyramid. We talked a lot on the journey to Leicester, but he did not tell me who he actually was. I did not care. The man was half dozing, the effect of the whisky. I gripped him by the throat with my right hand. I pressed his head against the back of the seat. He slid down, his hat falling off. I saw he had a bald patch on the crown of his head. He just gurgled. I pressed his throat hard. He did not resist.
It's amazing to think, like, if these two men didn't actually bump into him on that early morning, he may have actually gotten away with it.
Alfred admitted he read about the murder of Scottish barmaid Agnes Kesson in a rural lane in June of 1930, which remains unsolved. But it wasn't until Nellie Tucker informed him of her second pregnancy that he decided to fake his own death due to his financial difficulties. He wanted to start a fresh life, but keep his legal wife and family stable. He even drew out a bizarrely specific life insurance policy for £1,000 if anything were to happen to him in his car. He specifically found a man with similar height and build as himself, and bought him some whiskey to knock him unconscious. His plan was to then walk into Northampton town and get a train to Scotland. But as soon as he was spotted by the two men, he knew that they would report it, so he changed his plan and headed to London instead. His legal wife and two of his mistresses actually visit him at Bedford Jail to say their final farewells, before he was hanged on March the 10th, 1931. Whether Alfred Rouse was actually guilty or not was one question now solved, but the mystery remains. Who exactly did he kill? A metal box containing newspaper accounts of the trial was buried with the victim, and a cross erected on his grave. In May of 2012, 82 years after the murder, the family of 23-year-old William Briggs, who disappeared back in 1930, contacted the police to analyse their DNA and see if their relative was the man killed in the fire that night. They did actually manage to gain archived tissue samples of the victim, but it wasn't William Briggs. 9 families reached out whose relatives went missing around the time of the fire, but none have been a match, and the identity of the man taken too soon, I guess we'll have to continue seeking answers.